When I'm looking at an opportunity, the second person I want to meet is the CRO. Obviously, I meet the CEO first. I want to meet the CRO second. And I want to spend a lot of time with the CRO because it's an important relationship. It can be a little challenging. The best ones are when you come together and you're both looking for a solution.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome back to Run the Numbers. I'm CJ Gustafson, your host. This podcast I recorded here. Wow, I've done like 85. I've done a lot of episodes. This is the first time I've interviewed a CFO who's also been a founder. I interviewed Jessica Lanier, the CFO of Restaurant365. We talk about what makes a great CEO-CFO relationship. She's well positioned to speak about this, having also been a founder. We talk about her experiences running both private and public companies and what is critical for the CFO to have success at each. We talk about the skills that are important for CFOs who may be moving from private to public. And she has a lot of acquisition experience. She's like 4 for 4 or something like that. And every company she works for has been acquired, which is awesome. She talks me through being acquired by Qualtrics, a very large, very successful company, and their unique hiring process there. You actually have to like re-interview for your job after you've been acquired. They are very stringent on who they'll take. She takes us through, the secret process of how that went. She talks about a story about almost being acquired at one point and then somebody totally reneging on the offer and how that all went and having to basically rebuild up morale at the company she was working at the time. She takes us through why she joined Restaurant365 in the first place and how she thinks about it as almost an investment decision because, people forget that the biggest investors in a company are actually employees because you can only invest in one place and you're giving your time every single day. Investors, they give money, but they have a whole portfolio of assets. Employees, it's, your sole investment in a sense every single day. She takes us through kind of the criteria that you should use when you're picking a company. And she gives us advice to others who may question if they're ready for the next role. There are some listeners out there who right now are drinking some frosty beverages. Maybe it's a nice coffee. Maybe it's past 5 p.m. and they're having a nice Miller Lite. Miller Lite, please sponsor this podcast out of a Run the Numbers Yeti mug because they email me at cj@mostlymetrics.com. That's cj@mostlymetrics.com, a picture of a message that they sent to their coworkers in Microsoft Teams or Slack to hundreds of their coworkers and said, hey, this podcast is awesome. Here's a link. Give it a try. I love it. Please do it. I'll send you a mug. I don't even have a mug. They're that nice. All this and much more after a short word from our sponsors. Quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. Annual planning season is upon us. That's right, my favorite time of year. And it's not just about setting goals for the coming year. It's about ensuring you have the right tools in place to measure and achieve those goals. As a SaaS CFO, I know having access to reliable, real-time metrics is crucial for my annual planning process. That's why I'm so excited to partner with today's sponsor, Maxio. Maxio is a billing and financial operations platform that helps subscription businesses reconcile bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, and SaaS metrics automatically. By the way, guys, bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, not the same thing. Got to get them straight. Because these numbers are the foundation of your financial models, it's important to have quick access and trust that they are correct. Don't let the complexities of SaaS finance and accounting slow you down. If you want to start 2025 with the right tools, check out Maxio by visiting maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Request a demo through our link to support the podcast, ya boy, and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. maxio.com/run the numbers. Please, guys, I really need this. Jessica, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Not only am I excited to have you here, but my 2-year-old in the background, I think George is excited too. So thanks for joining us.
Well, that's good. I'll take an audience. Happy to have it.
So I was telling you before we started this that I think you're probably guest 75-ish, and you're the first former founder we've ever had on the show. How does having sat in the founder seat provide you context on like how a good CEO-CFO relationship works?
I know. It's a pretty unconventional background I have come to learn, but I think it helps a lot, to be honest. I mean, not only have I lived the sleepless nights and kind of the journey of a founder, I know the emotional roller coaster well, but the hardest part, in my opinion, about running a business, besides making sure you have the right people, is making the right trade-off decisions. You know, you never have enough capital, you never have enough people, you never have as many things as you wish you would have. So it really comes down to how are you going to allocate those resources? And I think being a founder has given me the broadest purview to think about that. Sometimes when you're in one seat, you know, you can think a little more I don't know, just black and white about some of the trade-offs, but I think I have a real appreciation for the nuances and the challenges of really looking at the whole picture and considering at each phase of the business where to make investments, where to pull back. If you pull one string, what happens on the other side of that string? So I think it's given me a very good perspective on those decisions.
I love that because a lot of times I say as a CFO, my job is just a series of resource allocation decisions, but you've taken it to the next level. You're saying, if you do this, then you can't do that. And this is what happens when you pull on the string. So it's almost like tracing through that cause and effect.
That's exactly right. I think sometimes, I don't want to say it's easy, but sometimes you can look at it, like you said, you know, as we're going to do this, we're not going to do that. But I like to pull on the thread because I think that's actually where the strategy lies, because sometimes it might look great on paper, but when you pull the thread, you're actually like unraveling something really important, or you need to stand up a piece of it to ensure that it's the right decision. So I think that's right. I think there's a lot of nuances behind those decisions.
Just to make it more tactical, what are some of the trade-offs? Would it be like hiring more people versus investing in more software, or like, and that's me being way too overly financed. I'm like thinking in a budget sense. So what's something that like being a CEO would kind of open your eyes to trade-off wise?
Yeah, I mean, there's those budget decisions, but then I think there's decisions around geography, you know, where you build out your company, where you build teams offshore. That's a conversation I have a lot, which is, we should put roles offshore. And I agree. But I've also learned, I think, from my past experiences that there are ways to do that can be really successful. And there are ways to do that can be really unsuccessful. So maybe on paper, it's a no-brainer because it's going to be less expensive and the cost profile is better. But there's a lot of nuances. I've learned that putting a handful of people offshore generally tends to be a lot less successful than putting whole teams offshore, and actually building cross-functional teams together offshore, because you can build a culture and you can build in a lot of learning and knowledge sharing. So, I mean, that's kind of a basic example, but I think that's that pulling that thread piece for me, because on paper, like, yeah, lower costs, awesome, we're all in. But then I've lived it a few times, you realize, well, you might actually be opening up more challenges than fewer if you're not super thoughtful about it.
Well, just to piggyback on that example, I remember once I'd presented to a CEO and I basically said, like, we can get 3 people for the cost of 1 or 2.5 people for the cost of 1 if we go to, say, Portugal for this. And what they said back is like, yes, that's true, but you're also adding like 3 more nodes to the system that we have to communicate with and for everything to get done. And that wasn't like a CEO mindset I had when I was making this like cost trade-off.
That's a really great point. That's another cost that you don't think about is complexity. I don't know. I'm at the point now, having done this a long time, that I am just so intentional about simplicity versus complexity. Like there are times to introduce complexity that create a lot of return for your business. But I would say generally, I need to be pretty convinced that that complexity is worth it, because exactly that. Like, that's great that you added costs and now you just added a whole bunch more things that you have to support administratively as a business.
Yeah. The CFO is oftentimes the person who's riding shotgun with the CEO and kind of that sounding board. Do you think that you're more, how do I put this? Almost like more emotionally available or capable for a CEO now to bounce ideas off of you because you've kind of been in that seat or kind of in that position where they say it's rather lonely?
I think so. I'd like to think so. It was interesting when I made my first pivot kind of out of the CFO founder role to strictly a CFO role supporting a founder. I got so many questions from the board and the CEO. What? You don't want to be a founder? Are you sure you don't want to be a founder? You're going to be the co-pilot, like what you were saying. Are you sure you want to be a co-pilot? And I said, I'm pretty sure I want to be a co-pilot because I think I'm in, for me, the best seat because I get to leverage all of those experiences and I think support a CEO through those experiences. But I also, to be honest, really appreciate the objectivity that I think I can bring to the role that's a little harder to bring to the role when you're a founder. Not that founders aren't objective, but like you said, there's an emotional investment that is real. It is your life. It is your everything is on the line. So I actually sort of love getting to do both, like supporting someone building their dream and the roller coaster and the trials and tribulations that go with that, but then being sort of the rudder, like the stabilizing force on that journey. And I think, I'm not sure if I could do it as well if I hadn't had the experience before, but I really enjoy that role a lot now.
We had spoken with Razak Jallo, who's the current CFO of Flowcast, and he had said to me that he learned when he was at Adobe that a great CFO essentially clears the road for the CEO to build or crystallize their vision.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. And I think that and seeing around corners. So I think it's clear the road, but also don't be afraid and be the one to say, like, you know what, I feel like coming up on the right, there might be something we want to pay attention to or something we should look at or something we should think about. And I think some people, it's hard to do that with a CEO who's usually incredibly smart and visionary and passionate and knows what they're building, what they're doing. But I think it's part of my job to keep my eye out for some of those things and then to be confident in sharing those thoughts.
Well, on the topic of relationships and sharing thoughts and weighing in, I love that you had put this down, but we were going through some topics that we could go over. And you said that you felt passionate about the hallmarks of a good CFO-CRO relationship. Mm-hmm. And not many people I ask bring that up. And I think it's so important because you're essentially arming the sales team with enough capacity to go out there and hit their quota. When you think about what makes a good relationship between a CFO, the person with the numbers, and the CRO, the one who has to go out and actually achieve them, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think people underestimate that often, sort of how important that relationship is. When I'm looking at an opportunity, the second person I want to meet is the CRO. Obviously, I meet the CEO first. I want to meet the CRO second. And I want to spend a lot of time with the CRO because it's an important relationship. It can be a little challenging. The best ones are when you come together and you're both looking for a solution. That's the best relationship. Like, I'm wearing this hat, you're wearing that hat, but we are coming together to find a solution to the problem. I think sometimes, and this can be based on a lot of factors, the CRO sees finance as a roadblock to so many things. And there's no doubt that finance has to abide by, obviously, there's a lot of black and white areas in finance, but if that's the dynamic, like that's not what I'm looking for. I am looking for, we should be working together. And I have just worked with some incredible CROs where we have found solutions where it felt like there was no solution to be found. So I think it's really, really important to establish that early on, and build a lot of trust that, like, I've got to solve for some things, you have to solve for some things, but like, let's trust each other that we can find something in the middle that works. And I always tell everybody, I mean, sales is the lifeblood of an organization. So not facilitating their progress and their growth is the worst thing that we can do.
And there is kind of this funny feeling out period when either you're new to the org or the CRO's new, where you're both trying to figure out, like, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth here and, like, you know, give the other person like a deal that I can't take back, or like under assigned quota, or the salesperson's like, I don't want to like put my hand up and take more on. But I found that I get past that initial point and we're on a good, good wavelength when the CRO is bringing me ideas that still may be half baked, and they're like, CJ's a thought partner. I can bounce an idea off him and I'm not going to feel like I got snake bitten because I said something.
100%. I think you just nailed it. And I think that's the trust piece. And it's showing really early on that there's no gotchas. I think you absolutely nailed it. It's like, I am here to work with you. And so never taking any of that information. I never, even sometimes when I see deals that I'm scratching my head at, like, I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, because that's not the point. The point is to go back and say, how can we do that better? Let's think about this. But I think you're absolutely right. That's the dream, is to be thought partners and working together. I don't have all the answers. The CRO doesn't have all the answers. So if we want to pretend like we do, that's going to be a really unproductive relationship, in my opinion. Like, let's not pretend, and let's just work together and find the right answers.
Yeah. Coming together to work on, like, what can we actually sell off the back of this truck and actually hit the number? That's when you're like, okay, now we're cooking. We're not playing this like cat and mouse game.
That's exactly right. You nailed it.
One of the reasons why I was so pumped to talk to you, Jessica, is you've had experience in both private and public companies. Do you think that, like, the checklist for success for a CFO is the same for each, or are there kind of different boxes that you have to check, or tools you have to pick up along the way?
Yeah, I think maybe a controversial statement. I think there's a little over-rotating on, can this private CFO be a public CFO? That might be a controversial.
I was so hoping you were going to say this.
Maybe that's a controversial position. I hear it all the time, and I just don't buy it. I think that the skill set is, I think you can be a great public company CFO coming from a private company. I don't buy it. I think what is very important about being a public company CFO, that is also important as a private one, but becomes more and more important, is your ability to tell the story about the business. And you do that as a private company CFO. You do it with investors. You do it, at conferences. But I do think it's next level at a public company, in that it's not just telling the story of where we've been and this is how great we are. It's painting a vision constantly of where you can go and where there's opportunity. That, I think, is the key, where there continues to be opportunity and how you as a company are set up to go and attack that. I actually think that's the biggest, not difference, because you have to do it in both places, but I think it's a skill set that you have to be acutely aware of when you're in the public setting. But I really think great CFOs can do both.
And I think there's, like, so many companies that want to be public, and they're all looking off this very small roster of CFOs with, like, this very bespoke experience. And I don't know, I'm biased because I haven't been a public company CFO, but when I was trying to become a CFO, it was like, yeah, of course, I'm not a CFO. No one's allowed me to do it yet. That's right. I think you have to give people the chance in a lot of examples and it can turn out really good. At the same time, you could put them on the court and they miss every shot. But I think there are more stories out there than bad ones of people doing it for the first time and it going well.
You have to do it for your first time. Every single person has to do it for the first time. So I'm a pretty big believer in that. And I feel like there's a little bit of an over rotation on that right now.
So just to put a bookend on it, you think it's storytelling, being able to tell the full story, not just the financial story behind the company?
I think it's telling the full story, yes. And then the scale. I think everything just is next level. Your ability to report in a timely manner. Like, there is no room for error. I mean, typically in finance, there isn't much room for error, but when you're public, there's none. So I think there's an operational skill set. You know, oftentimes in finance, we focus so much on technical skills, I think, and I really look for operational skills in the leaders that I bring in, meaning the ability to run operations, to build things, to grow things, to think strategically about things, because that's the make or break, I think, when you get to scale and when you get to be public. If you're just really good at some technical things, I think you can drown pretty quickly if you're not thinking operationally. How is this all going to work? And what is the most efficient way to do it?
That's great. And Jessica, you'd brought up the word scale. And I remember before the pod started, you were telling me that you think all finance leaders should have a chance to operate a company at scale. Why is that? Because I've worked at bigger companies before, and after a certain point, my head starts to hurt. And I'm like, oh, this is moving so slow, or I'm not enjoying it as much as I did when I was building stuff. Well, what are the benefits of someone who's thinking about maybe going from small to big?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a real world example with me, which is I was CFO of a company that got acquired by Qualtrics, which was a big, newly public company in Utah. They're about almost $1 billion in revenue when I left. And I had been CFO multiple times before. And so everyone, was like, okay, you'll do your transition and then off you go back to your CFO role. And I really thought that's what I was going to do. And I had a 6-month transition period. And I got there, and one, the CFO was amazing. Shout out to Rob Bachman. He was incredible. And two, I just realized I could learn so much here that is going to be so helpful and practical when I go back to a smaller scale business. And to be honest with you, I don't know if a lot of people would have made that decision. I mean, I became VP Finance working for a CFO. I had been CFO many times. People kept asking me, like, are you sure? Why are you doing this? Why would you do this? And I just said, I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. And seeing the business at that scale, honestly, I think it's elevated my game as a CFO so much, because it's knowing where you're going. Doesn't mean you have to live there and that's where you want your career to be. But I think knowing where you're going and what the challenges look like at that scale make you so much better at how you build a company earlier on. And I just think about it all the time. Like, my team knows I am just like, that's great. You're doing that little thing over there. That does not scale. Like that does not scale. Like, that feels really good. And we have a lot of control over it right now. Tell me how that works when we're 2 billion in revenue, because I don't think it does. So it's just made me acutely aware of having an eye for those things. It was one of the best things I could have done.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. leapfin.com. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Oh yeah! Go to planful.com/metrics to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Planful. That's planful.com/metrics. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. I think there's also this element of this. That's what good looks like.
Yes.
So you can take it back, but like if someone's described to you what they think it looks like, it's very different than having lived it.
That is so true. And I think you get a confidence from living it and seeing it. When you've lived it and you see it, I think it gives you a lot more confidence in applying it than, like you said, sort of philosophically knowing it. Right. I think it's given me a lot more confidence.
Yeah, I found that looking at the benchmarks of this at 500 million ARR, you should be able to do this and that. And then actually being there like, whoa, this is, okay, I get the feeling. It's real to me.
So it's a great point. Yes.
What were some of the things at scale that you think were important to you? I think you had mentioned like the ability to look ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to look ahead, but I actually think it's a little bit back to that operational piece. Everything becomes operations at that point. You know, when you have, take AR, for example, which, you know, billings and collections, it's always a challenge. It's never a perfect science. But when you have almost $2 billion going in and out of your business, like think of what the size of that team looks like. And we had a large team in multiple geographies, offshore, different cultures. Like that's an example where it seems like right now, okay, we're building our billings and collections function. You know, we can send invoices and we can collect money. But seeing the complexity of it at that level, and that's like I actually hired someone, I wanted an entrepreneurial person to run that. I looked for someone so different. I picked someone outside of finance. I was like, I want almost like an entrepreneur in here who is going to build this like a business. So that's just an example where you see, wow, you know, the complexities of this and doing this well and doing this efficiently looks so different at scale than it does at a smaller level. And things you can do when you're smaller are just going to break when you get to that level.
On the Qualtrics point, did you have to like re-interview for your job? Don't they have a pretty, how do I put this, very specific way of hiring people there?
They do. It was actually fascinating. So when we were acquired, they don't, it's not just this like, okay, cool, everybody has a job and you just show up. They wanted people to work there, but yeah, I specifically, I had a 6-month transition, and I would say once the CFO and I both started thinking like maybe this could make sense for me to stay, it was a months long process. There was a role, and it wasn't just like, okay, there's a role and we'll put her in this role. It was months long.
It was a month, and you were already working there for multiple months.
I was already working there.
It wasn't like you were like a cold DM on LinkedIn.
No, I was in the leadership team meetings. I went to the offsite. Like I fully worked there. I worked with everybody, and I learned so much from that experience. They take it so seriously who works at that company. And it's amazing, but it was wild. I mean, I had to I interviewed with one of the presidents. I mean, I was being interviewed like the whole entire time. People who were working for me were interviewed. And then even when I got a promotion a couple years later, same thing. I mean, you have to get like written recommendations from folks. And I have to admit, when I first got there, because I had come from smaller companies, to your point, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just big company craziness. You know, what is all this bureaucracy? But I learned that they picked a few things to take really seriously and put a lot behind. And to a person, it was some of the most amazing people I've ever worked with in my career. And I think it's because of the rigor. It also made it a really desirable place to work. Like, people wanted to get a job there. It was a big achievement. And there's this flywheel that happens with that I learned a lot from.
I'm always fascinated by companies that have these unique or bespoke hiring practices.
Yeah, same. Because same. I think it takes a lot of discipline to put them in, and then you wonder, like, is that part of the secret sauce? I think it kind of is.
That's what I wonder, and I also wonder if it like self-selects for a certain type of person.
I think it does, and I think it creates, like I said, this flywheel, because if you're a high achiever, like, you want to get that job.
Oh yeah. It's that Groucho Marx quote, like, I don't want to be a part of a club that wants me as a member.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, speaking of acquisitions, I don't know if I got this wrong reading your bio. Has every company you've worked at been acquired?
Yes, which is
wow.
wild. Which is wild. I tell people, hire me with caution, because I mean, even Qualtrics, which part of why I joined was I thought, okay, it's a public company. This is really cool. I can do sort of the non-M&A, like, we can acquire companies, but do the non-M&A. And then when my boss called me, he said, are you sitting down?
Oh,
You're
wow.
about to join our diligence team, because we may be getting acquired. So it is true. It's been really wild.
You've seen this from multiple angles. So actually, maybe let's go back to when you were, I believe, a founder. Let's go back to Tonic. You had quite a roller coaster when it came to M&A there, didn't you?
I did. So this is probably my most, roller coaster version of M&A. M&A is always a roller coaster, but this one was next level.
There are different flavors, but this one seemed pretty extreme.
This was pretty extreme. So we had been, I don't know, in operations maybe 7 or 8 years. We had some interest along the way. And long story short, a pretty big company was interested in buying us. We went through, I remember my nights, my weekends, just 24/7 going through all the diligence. And we got to the finish line. We were agreed on all the terms. We had gone through everything. We had mapped out kind of how the teams would work together. And so we scheduled a visit. We flew out to Chicago to do a closing dinner. And as part of the day, we did some strategizing on what we were going to do. And as we were leaving the strategy session, the president said, hey, let's meet for a drink before dinner. And we said, great. It was myself and my 2 co-founders. And we sat down for a drink, and before we even said a word, he basically said, we're going to massively retrade this deal. And it was a great outcome that we had negotiated. And he basically showed up with a number that was drastically different than what we had been discussing. And I was in shock. I was just in shock. And we walked. We left. We said, no way, and this isn't how we do business. And we left. That was the longest flight I've ever had, was flying home. I couldn't even process it, what had happened. And so we kind of went back and forth, but it died. And the hardest thing, because our employees, this was a really good lesson. Our employees had known that we were going through this transaction. We were all excited. And going back and it felt like we just were starting over. We basically had to go back, tell them the deal fell through, and then figure out how to re-energize everybody And it felt like we had climbed this mountain and we got to the top, and then we just slid right back down and we had to start over again. But I learned a lot. It honestly, probably those couple years after that was when I learned a lot of rigor on how to run a business. We almost became ruthless. Like, we're just going to be so focused. We're just going to make all the hard decisions that we know we should make. It was really interesting. We just became it was like the fear and some of the things just left, and we just went for it. And then we did end up selling the company for a great outcome a couple years later, but it was brutal.
Man, and what's tough about that too is it's human nature. If people know, they start counting in their head what it could be worth on paper, and that's really hard mentally to come back from.
It was really hard. And it's like you feel like you're crossing a finish line and everyone's high-fiving. So it was really hard. I actually don't think we lost anyone. We managed to get everybody back on the boat, but it was tough. That was a very, very tough experience.
And also, like, the tech world is small, and people have to remember that you have to play long-term games, because that will get around if you retrade on deals.
It was a really good lesson for me in that respect. I vowed to myself that, and as CFOs, we have a lot of important conversations. We make a lot of deals and arrangements with folks. And I just, to your point, I said, I always want to be known as just fair and direct. Right. And I will deliver the bad news face to face up front. Like, it really gave me a lot of conviction on that point.
Being fair and direct, I love that you called out those two qualities, because I think people respect a CFO if they can give a tough message, and if they can be fair about things that, they could have actually taken more value from you if they wanted to, if they had you kind of over a barrel in a bad spot. But they look back to those decisions and said, did you communicate something truthfully to me? Yes. And they also look back and say, did you force me into a deal that, I didn't want to take? Because it is a long road.
I think you're exactly right. And I think credibility is the name of the game for a CFO. You make or break on trust and credibility. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, I always tell people I wear one hat, and it's the company hat. Like, that's a good one. You cannot have even a hint or whiff of anything other than making decisions that are best for the business. Because as a CFO, I think that is just a slippery slope.
I've been a part of a ton of funding rounds, not as many M&A events, but I remember someone once telling me, oh, well, for the funding rounds, don't actually try to get the ultimate or maximize the outcome to a degree where, like, you can't come back from it, because you always have to raise again down the road, and you don't want to have to take a down round or something like that. But for M&A, like, go for it. Try to take as much value as possible. And at first I thought that was the right way to think about it. But the more I've seen, I actually don't know if that's true, because A, there could be an earnout structure to it and you'll never hit those targets, or B, it'll get around that, like, you were part of a deal that, like, wasn't as legit as people thought. And even if you made a bunch of money on it, it could hurt you down the road. I don't know if that has any credence to it, though.
I think it absolutely does. And I think, it's easy. I've seen people do this a lot in M&A. It's easy to just kind of get, I don't know, exactly that. You think you should be as aggressive as you want to be. And at the end of the day, companies are bought, not sold. And people buy companies. It's very hard to sell a company, to say, I want to sell this company. And if someone is buying a company, you should hope that they are doing really strong analysis to understand what the return of that purchase is for them. And if it meets within, like, you should be doing the same calculation on the other side. And people don't do that. They just think, what's the most I can get? And I'm always thinking, like, I always want to understand exactly what they think they're getting from the acquisition. And then I want a back of the envelope, like, what's the value? What's the price where they
I'm a reasonable person too. Would I do that?
Yes. Like, if you get stupid or crazy, to your point, like, you may find one that can happen. That'll probably fail on the other side, which actually people don't realize how not fun that is to be a part of something on the other side that isn't working very well. But I always try to do the math as if I'm sitting in their seat. And then I try to predict, like, what do they think the value is and what's the equation for them that gets them there?
I think the quote was, someone told me, optimize your fundraise and maximize your M&A, but I think it's actually optimize your fundraise and optimize just a little bit more your M&A. But like, if you completely maximize it to the point where like you essentially have an earnout where you're an indentured servitude for 2 years, like that's not a really good outcome for you either.
It's not a good outcome. And a lot of people don't think about what happens that next day when you wake up. So it's important. I think that's a really good piece of advice.
Since you've been through all these M&A events, what typically happens with a CFO upon that transition period? Is it usually they want you to stay for like 6 months or something and then figure it out? Or what are kind of the different flavors? And you don't have to use any specific ones that you've been a part of, but just in general, how should finance leaders kind of think about it?
Yeah, I think you should think the most likely scenario is you are not going to stay on the other side. I think most will want you for a transition period that will be meaningful. I mean, it's actually really important to do the transition. So I think it's most likely you won't. I think the exceptions are PE, because sometimes, you might not be being combined with another business or fold. PE is a scenario where you may stay in seat because it's a standalone business that continues. I think another exception is occasionally they will replace some existing management players with acquired, depending on the size of the acquisition. But I would say for the most part, I think it's fairly safe to assume that you won't stay on long term. And I think getting that out up front is so much, because people feel awkward about it.
Yeah, let's make it not awkward here.
Awkward. Like, we're all adults. Like, I get it. This is all good. Because you're part of the discussion, so it's actually more awkward. Like, I just get it out right up front. Like,
that's really great advice for people listening, actually.
Yeah, I think you just say, I'm here to do whatever you need me to do. 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, but I'm out. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it frees you up to have just really transparent conversations about the business, and you're a part of helping make sure everything's successful. I just think it's really good to establish that up front. So
it is 3 to 6 months. Let's just say that. What goes on in that transition period? That's a black box to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a lot of brass tacks. It's kind of interesting. It's literally, okay, how do we show us how you do all of your everything. And then
here's the QuickBooks login.
Yes. And then you actually, typically there's kind of a work plan, and it's pretty brass tacks. It is figuring out how to integrate everything you've been doing into their systems and their processes. It's a lot of work. It's hard work, actually.
It is.
And the most important things to identify. So that work is hard and long. The most important things to identify are any areas where you philosophically operate differently, because that's super important. Like, do you recognize your contracts differently? Is your selling motion different? Do you commit to things in a different way? Is the software live under different circumstances than the acquiring company? Like, those are the most important things to align on right out of the gate, because sometimes that gets overlooked and you can be halfway through and then you realize, whoa, we do these things totally differently. And then you have to decide, like, are you going to do it their way?
Who's right?
Doing it your way? Who's right? And get that out of the way.
Yeah, I think there's this misconception that, your company was acquired and you're the outgoing CFO, 3 to 6 months. It's a cakewalk. You can basically just chill out. It doesn't sound that way.
It's not. It's really not. And I do think a lot of people think that. To be honest, my first acquisition, I think we got acquired and I was like, woohoo, I went to Hawaii on vacation. And
that's actually what I was expecting. You would go to, I was going to make that joke before I asked you that. You would go to Hawaii on vacation.
Of course we go to Hawaii on vacation. And then I found myself on calls the whole time I was on vacation in Hawaii. And I'm like, wow, I really underestimated this.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong. Like, there is a sense of celebration and relief for sure. Like, you're not responsible for everything anymore, but there is still a lot of work, especially if you want to do it right. There's a lot of work to do.
That's awesome. All right, so we talked about M&A, but I want to talk about you joining a company, Restaurant365. And I always say that the biggest investors in companies are actually the employees. It's not the VCs in the cap table, because they invest their time and effort every day, and you can only really vest in one place at once. And so I'm hoping, Jessica, you can take me through your framework in deciding to join Restaurant365, because I do think it's something that other leaders could adopt when they're evaluating a company.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you just phrased that, because that's very much how I thought about it. I've done it. I've been doing this for a while. I knew when I left Qualtrics and took a role, I was going to be really selective about that role. I don't know. I hit a point where it was like, I'm going to really think about what this is going to look like. And I had a very strong thesis, and Restaurant365 met my thesis, but I can walk you through what that thesis is. And this is years of being in software. And my number one thesis was I wanted a product that was a need to have. It is core infrastructure for your customer to run their business. I've seen many things that are like super nice to have, almost need to have. But that was my number one criteria, that for our customers, they need this to run their business. So that was my number one. Go-to-market was my number two. I wanted a go-to-market machine. And by that, I mean a go-to-market function that was focused on efficiency and metrics and actually getting more efficient and more scalable as time goes on. I've done a lot of enterprise software, which I love, but it's often very challenging to find that efficiency and that scale in long sales cycle, big enterprise deals. So that was another one that was important to me. I also really wanted a business that truly could serve all segments, SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And that's really, really rare. So that was probably a tall ask. I think a lot of people try and do successfully in some ways, but it's probably back to that critical infrastructure piece. Like, no, this actually works and is adopted across all the segments in the market.
Can you dig into that one? I'm curious. Because some people actually are like, enterprise or bust. I want to sell enterprise B2B software. And other people think like PLG, SMB software is the best. Well, why did you want to work somewhere that sold to all the segments?
Yeah, I think because, I don't know, maybe it's my finance mind. They sort of balance each other out in my perspective. And I think there's a natural equilibrium that is created it's almost like when you serve all three segments, it puts sort of natural parameters and balancing factors on the business. Because if you just sell to SMB, the price points tend to be lower, churn can be higher. So I think depending on the category, there can be a lot of risk in that segment, and it's just a volume game, and that can be challenging.
Right.
Mid-market is kind of the sweet spot, I think, generally, because you can get a decent price point. I think the sales cycles are relatively reasonable, but there can be a lot of shifting in mid-market, acquisitions, businesses coming and going, and then enterprise. Everybody always wants to do enterprise, and I love enterprise because it's sticky and you can get really high prices, but the sales cycles can be long. Mm-hmm. The product expectations can be really high. So I just feel like there's this equilibrium that's created. I feel like if you have a product that can serve enterprise, then you have product market fit. You have a robust product. So I like the proof point of that. But if you can only serve enterprise, I think getting some of those efficiencies in the go-to-market are much harder at that level. So if you can balance that with mid-market and SMB, I keep coming back to this word equilibrium, and my mind kind of creates this equilibrium. I also think you de-risk parts of your business by doing that.
That's where my mind went, because instead of just trying to optimize for the wallet share of one type of customer, now you've de-risked kind of your selling motion and where you're going to find those revenue dollars over time. It's a healthier mix.
It's a healthier mix, and I think it allows you to continue adjusting that mix based on market dynamics. Like,
Yeah.
maybe because of what's going on in the market, you want to invest a bit more in mid-market this year because SMBs are struggling right now because of something in the economy. I like that mix.
Yeah. I really enjoy hearing about how you sized up the company. I remember when I was interviewing for my role at the current company, I was actually talking to one of the investors. And I was going through this list. I was like, can you go through what you think the company's secret sauce is? What are the competitive moats? What's the TAM here? And he's like, wait, I'm the investor. Why are you asking me this? I'm like, well, I want to hear why you wanted to put your money behind it, because I can only work at one place at a time. So break it down for me.
Yeah, I actually think that's great advice. I often ask investors that too, because one, if they can't tell you really simply, if it takes like 15 sentences to explain it, then I think might not be super clear what the value is. And two, like, they know. It's why they put money in it, and they could just tell you. And I heard all these things when I talked to investors, and I just thought, okay, validated, like, I'm in.
Yeah. And I'm the type of person who can't have that personal conviction if I haven't come to like my own thesis on why I think it's going to work.
I think that's right. I think that's really right. And another one that was important to me that maybe just kind of signals part of where I am in my career, like, I really wanted to work on a product that I understood and a category that I cared about. I mean, at the end of the day, this is like back office kind of ERP, accounting. And I mean, I'm a buyer of those tools in my own business. So that's really fun. And then restaurants it's the underpinning, we all have memories and social experiences and all of that. So that was definitely the icing on the cake for me. And I can explain it really easily, which is really nice.
Well, I was pumped about my current role, and a lot of listeners know this. It's a vertical marketplace for aftermarket car parts, because I could explain that to my mom and grandma at a cookout way easier than trying to explain cybersecurity. Like, they would look at me like I had 5 heads. And part of it was because I didn't really truly understand what we were selling.
Yes, this might be the first one that is like very easy for me to explain, which I love.
Yeah, you could explain this to like another parent at a soccer game.
100%.
Yeah, it checks that box. Jessica, what advice would you give to others who question if they're ready for their next role or not?
Yeah, it's funny. I get this question all the time. Like, I'm not ready, or how do I know that I'm ready? And my answer is always you just have to do it. Like, that's how you know if you're ready. And by the way, if you're doing it, you'll be ready and you'll make it happen. I think there's a lot of paralysis and maybe more in finance than other places, because finance can be seen as a pretty linear career and skill set. I think if you're asking that question, you should do it because you're contemplating it and you're a little afraid. And I think every role you take, you should be a little afraid. I'm over my skis on every role I take, to the point that now, like, I don't even notice because I'm so used to just that feeling and that muscle. So I just think you have to do it, and you have to just kind of quiet the voices in your head. And I think relying on the things I rely on are good judgment. I collaborate well with other people. I try to show up in a way that represents the business really well. And then I am not afraid to ask questions and seek help. I mean, there's no one who's going to know everything. And I'm so comfortable with that. I am so comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think when I stepped into the role, my biggest fear was somebody else knowing the finances or the business better than me. But once I got through my first board meeting, I was like, no, I know this better than anyone else. It's not like anybody else at this table has studied the P&L better. But if I didn't take that shot and live in that ambiguous world of like, do I actually know what's going on here? Am I qualified to be here? Then you can't get to that next point.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. It's, you always think people are thinking more about it than they actually are. Like,
yeah.
You always think like, well, do they think this? They're probably actually not thinking about it. They're just, we are overthinking about it. And I think they're believing that you're competent. They're believing that you know what you're doing. And I think that's most people's kind of baseline. So there's room in there to grow. There's room.
There is. And to a certain extent, I think if something doesn't scare you a bit, it's probably not worth doing at all.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, that's been my whole career. And I don't know why I keep doing that, but that's That's the jam.
I do it to my wife. I think I'm like addicted to some like low grade stress. If I don't have this stressor in my life, I like don't feel mentally sane. So I think it's an addiction.
I know. I think it's a problem. Hopefully someone will figure out how to find a support group for us or something.
It's this podcast. It's everybody listening to it.
Podcast. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Jessica, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round.
Great.
First thing, you're immensely successful, but you got to give me something you've screwed up in your career. Could be this job or anyone before.
Yeah, I think early in my career, I really screwed up on some hires, which is pretty big. I mean, it's pretty major. Like those are painful screw ups. And I think kind of what I said earlier, I think early on, maybe my lack of confidence, I overvalued technical skills. Like, oh, this person has done this and they know this and they know that. And I just realized like that's baseline. I mean, they should know that. They should have those technical skills. And now I've learned a lot about hiring, and no one ever gets it perfectly right. But those are painful mistakes to make. They're hard to fix, and they can really set you back. So I think those are some of the mistakes I made, but I've learned a lot. And I think now I have a much broader way in which I evaluate people for roles. And it's a lot of what you said, potential.
Yeah. We've also got the inverse of that quite a few times where people didn't move on from individuals fast enough either. And I think everyone, including me, has had experiences on both sides of that coin that you learn from.
Yeah, I think I could say both. So that's a good example. Yep.
Okay. If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
I think there's a couple things I would tell her. One is take the vacation. I missed a lot of vacations. I would reschedule them. I would not go on them because it was never a good time. And guess what I've learned? It's never a good time. So yeah, just take them. It's the one commitment I've really made in my career recently, which is I'm just going and you'll never regret going. And if I have to work, I have to work. But I would have taken more of those vacations. And I think the second thing is like careers, businesses, personal lives, they all go in phases. And I think take the long view, not the in the moment view, and kind of recognize as a business or in your career or in your personal life when you're entering a new phase. I think that's half the battle, is to be aware that maybe it's shifting and what was working before isn't working anymore. And then just be proactive and say, don't get stuck in like, well, this is how I do it, or this is what was working. It's just, okay, well, what works now?
Wow. That's amazing. Well, you have to understand the moment in a lot of ways.
That's the hardest part. And I think human nature is to resist the change.
Yes.
And so you actually really try to convince yourself that it's not changing. And I have learned that the sooner you acknowledge it is changing, the faster you can solution it. And I think working in kids is a great example. It's like you're going to go through all these different phases, and at one phase it's working, and then all of a sudden you're like, why isn't this working? And then you realize, well, like the babysitter isn't the answer anymore, or this isn't the answer. And then if you just like grip onto it, I think you create so much more thrash in your life than to just say like, okay, wait, the kids are getting older. Something's different. What would work better now? And it's the same with businesses. It's the same with careers. I think that holding on creates so much thrash that you can avoid if you just sort of lean into it and recognize it. Even if you don't know what the phase is, just acknowledge something is changing.
Yeah, something's changing.
Yeah.
I've asked that question a lot of times. That's probably the best answer we've got. Thank you.
Wow.
That was
All
good.
right, thank you.
All right. From the personal to the technical, can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools do you use today to get the job done?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty traditional. I mean, I would say a Salesforce. And then we have Intact, which I had not used before this job. So that's a new one for me. We use Adaptive for financial planning. We have Stripe. We have VersaPay. We have 2 different payment platforms that we use. I'm trying to think what else we have. We have Concur for expenses.
Okay.
It's a pretty traditional stack. I will tell you that one thing that is really on my mind that I'm paying attention to is how we have Workday for our HRIS, but
they own Adaptive, right?
I think they own Adaptive, and they've launched a financial ERP that I've talked to a lot of people who say they love it. Apparently it's very different. I'm not promoting Workday. I'm just saying I'm interested in a concept of consolidation at some point.
Yeah.
Around even your CRM with your ERP. I mean, no one's doing that yet, but that is really, I think that's the future. Somebody out there, I think that's the future.
Somebody do it.
Somebody do that.
And then sponsor this podcast after you've made a lot of money. Okay, last one. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen somebody try to expense?
Family vacation to the Bahamas for the whole
whole thing.
The whole family.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yep. Which would be awesome. I mean, unfortunately, that's not in our budgets. Not my current company. This is in my past, but that was probably one of the bolder ones I have seen.
That's good.
Yeah.
Jessica, this has been an incredible conversation. Thanks for being generous with your time.
Thank you. This has been great, and congratulations on the podcast.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.